This session, we are going to talk about policies and legal system construction on green hydro development. There will be 7 papers altogether. There will be 7 papers altogether in this session. And we are starting right now at 2 o'clock and will be finished by 3:45. So accordingly we have divided approximately 20 minutes. 15. And our first paper is presented by Mr. Niels Nielsen, who is secretary of very popular organization called International Energy Agency, headquartered based in Paris, but he is based in Australia. He is going to talk about community and social drivers for mini hydro development.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Singh. Yes, I am the Secretary of the International Energy Agency's Hydropower group, and the reason I'm in Australia is because that group is part of the Renewable Energy Working Party, and we're all basically virtual organisations. What I'm going to do is I'm going to spend about 3 slides talking about the IEA Hydro Group, and then I'm going to be talking about its community and social drivers, using examples of 3 projects in the UK. So the International Energy Agency, Hydropower Group, it's a working group of, at the moment we have 9 members, and these are the members. As you can see, we have Australia, Brazil, China, and China is represented both by ICSHP and also China Yangtze Power Corporation, of course the owners of the 3 Gorges and many other projects. So really we have the extreme from the small to the very largest. We also have the EU, Finland, France, Japan, Norway and the USA in our group. Just want to talk about the different annexes or working groups or research activities we undertake. Over on the left-hand side, this is the annex on small-scale hydropower of most interest to those of you in this room. We also have one looking at the value of hydropower, both energy services, ancillary services, and also water services. In other words, what is the value of the irrigation component of a multi-purpose reservoir, etc. This is one looking at the greenhouse gas emissions from freshwater reservoirs, and that of course is a very topical subject now because the public somehow have the idea that hydropower reservoirs are a major source of greenhouse gases, and we're working to get a definitive answer on that subject. Hydropower and fish, primarily passage upstream and downstream. Management model for hydropower cascade systems, that is led by the China Yangtze Power Corporation, 3 Gorges. And over here we have maintenance works and decision making, looking at why you would upgrade existing hydro plants. So that's the IEA Hydro Group. Now I'm going to be talking about one of the working groups or the sub-working groups of the small hydro, and this is basically looking at what are the community and social drivers for small hydropower. You know, as it's quite obvious that the cost of equipment and the infrastructure are proportionally very high, and it's very hard to develop a very small hydro plant based purely on economics. Environmental studies, I think as we heard in the US, can take a long time to get approved. Interconnection costs also, as we heard this morning, can be very high, and the local distribution lines can be quite expensive. So basically there are certain factors that need to be taken into consideration to enable a successful mini hydro project. These include looking at modular equipment and infrastructure. I think we're going to be hearing about that later on in this session. Support in terms of feed-in tariffs or equivalents. Low-cost loans, again we heard something about that from the States earlier today. And the sales of power to offset retail prices. And by that I mean if you're selling into the grid, it's more difficult than if you're actually offsetting somebody's basically retail prices. And then what I'm going to be talking about in red is the community and social drivers. Oops, sorry, wrong way. I'm going to talk about 3 projects. The first project is a 60 kilowatt Archimedes screw turbine sited in an abandoned cotton mill. The second project is a 90 kilowatt Turgo impulse turbine, and this is an outdoor school in the Western Highlands of Scotland. And the third one, which is very interesting, is a 100 kilowatt Turgo impulse turbine, and it's part of a totally integrated renewable system for a remote island. This is an example of an islanded system on an island. So this is the Archimedes screw turbine, and down here you can see the ruins of an old cotton mill. And cotton in Manchester, cotton was driven primarily, of course, by water wheels. This is the turbine, basically cavity, where the water wheel was, and that's where they put in the Archimedes screw. It's located near Manchester, as I mentioned. It was conceived by an environmental group, but it was developed and owned by a small community group, which basically has shares in this small project. And the objectives of this community group were primarily to educate the populace and the broader stakeholders on environmental sustainability and renewable energy. So really it's very much, even though it's very small, it's very much an educational project, but it also has some very strong environmental and social and community benefits. It says there in the last bullet, some of the project revenue is allocated as grants for community projects, and these are primarily educational projects. So in the middle there, under the cage, you can see, or hopefully you can see, is the Archimedes screw. And for those of you not familiar, it's basically like a very large auger, and it's driven, in this case, by a head of about 3 meters. On the right, you can see the weir, and that weir was not built for the project. This was an existing weir, and this was an existing fishway, which was used for salmon coming upstream to spawn. All its performance parameters are available online, but the starting is manual only, and that's primarily because of safety reasons. They have to make sure that nobody's in the way before they start up the unit. So looking at the financial and commercial aspects, the interesting thing is in this little table down here, community shareholders, and this is 231 members of the community. So this is a large group of the community who've invested a total of £125,000 sterling. Grant funding from various sources was just a little bit more, and then they took out a bank loan to take out to cover the balance. Over here it talks about the net revenue pays off the loan and small dividend to shareholders, but that loan is also used to fund the local community grants. And following the expiry of the bank loan, they will then do some refurbishment. There has been a little bit of trouble with the thrust bearings on the bottom of the Archimedes screw for the technical people, and so they have to replace those. So what are the community benefits? Certainly, as I mentioned, the profits are dispersed to solar schools, local heritage centre, festivals and educational programs. They've cooperated with the environmental agencies and now have the fishway has re-established migration zones. There's been economic benefit because 60% of the construction was done by people in the immediate vicinity, and targeting marketing of the site has increased numbers that are coming to town. So it's been a very popular destination for people wanting to see a hydro plant, small hydro plant actually in operation. This is the second example, and this is a 90 kilowatt Turgo. This is looking upstream. As you can see, it's a pretty barren area, and looking downstream, down here is the little powerhouse. Oops, wrong way. So the background is it's located in the West Highlands of Scotland. it's an area of very high rainfall and very regular rainfall. So even though it's a low flow, because it's a pretty small catchment, it has a pretty consistent flow. And the project was sized at under 100 kilowatts to take advantage of the feed-in tariff system which was prevalent at that time. An interesting part is that the scheme was part financed by the turbine manufacturer, and at times, if there are times of low flow, then the repayment is taken into account and it's a low repayment time. This is the headworks. This is a colander stream, which basically means the water, when it flows over the top, goes in through this grill into the intake, but anything like debris or rocks just bounces over and comes down out at the bottom. And this is a picture of the little turbo, 90 kilowatts. As you can see, it's ahead of 120 and a very low flow. So the community benefits, I think this is one of these outdoor schools which helps to give education for basically underprivileged children and young adults. So it's very much a social benefit organisation. The construction was done mostly by the locals. They used their backhoes and their hoisting equipment to build this project. It's at the end of a long line, so it helps to stabilise the grid. They've had, again, a number of activities which have encouraged people to build other projects nearby. Now, the last example I'm going to give is this 100 kilowatt turbo impulse turbine on a Scottish island. So this is the island. This is approached by boat. And this is the 100 kilowatt powerhouse, and this is the flows coming out of it. The background is, this is a very interesting situation because, to start with, the community bought the island from the previous owners. It wasn't a very productive island, so the cost wasn't very high. Just had a few sheep roving over it. As you can see, it's pretty barren. They looked at having a cable to the mainland, but for 50 residents, it was much too expensive. So they decided that they would do it themselves. So they built basically a self-sufficient, renewable and sustainable system based on hydropower, which is the mainstay, wind and solar, and supported by batteries and a standby diesel. And they had challenging for about 6 months. They were raising funds. They raised it through the EU, and you wonder why Britain wanted to leave the EU if they're providing funds for their small hydro. And again, they came up with a project that had a total of 225 kilowatts, which powered the 50 homes and 20 businesses, and they had 16 kilometers of underground distribution line. These are just some pictures of the components. PV, the wind turbines. These are the batteries. The battery banks, I say they're pretty extensive. This is the support of the diesel generating set. These are the inverters in a small shed, and this is actually the 6 kilowatt. They have a small 6 kilowatt hydropower turbine as well as the 100 kilowatts. Just wanted to show this one. As you can see, the total price was 1.6 million pounds, and they had for about 7 or 8 different mechanisms for funding this. But more, I wanted to show the picture over here. The blue is the hydro, and as you can see, this is the mainstay of the power grid. But here, this is the month of June in this particular year, and you can see there was basically very little rain, so they had to rely on the red, which was primarily the diesel generation. So if you're ever thinking of taking a holiday in the west of Scotland, I would suggest you go in June, because it appears it doesn't rain so much. Whereas over here in the winter, the rest of the year is pretty wet. So the community benefits, well, it really united the community. First, the community bought the island, and then they put in their own system. And they operate it, and they maintain it, and they're very proud of it. It is a destination. A lot of organisations from around the world visit this island, and so it has quite a tourist potential as well. So it really is an excellent example of what you can do if you put your mind to it. So my last slide is the summary and conclusions. Mini hydro projects can be expensive to build, particularly in developed countries like the UK and the States. And they're difficult to fund, making the economic argument always very challenging. But if you get the community behind you and come up with some really creative ideas about the benefits of these projects, they can become viable. And key areas of community development include the communication to not only the people in your community, but also in a wider zone. In other words, you're encouraging people to think renewable, to think hydropower as well. You've got to get external funding. You can't rely totally on the price of sales. You use your local businesses and workforce to build, operate and repair the projects, and you work closely with the various government agencies. This last line is part of a project, and it will be available on the www.ieahydro.org website in about 4 or 5 months, together with about 30 or 40 other case histories. So with that, I'll thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your nice presentation. Very beautifully, he has presented something about hydropower, how community is going to benefit and how they are interested to develop it. So once again, thank you very much for your informative and experience sharing.